G'day folks. Say, have you heard of video games? It's an obscure topic, I know, and one that doesn't get a lot of coverage here on YouTube, but believe it or not, they're getting quite popular. The video game industry generated approximately $150 billion in 2020 alone, which to the entire world minus about 2 people is a lot of money. I'll admit, I'm a bit of a gamer myself, so you can trust me when I say that there is a genre of games out there for everyone. You want swords, sorcery, and mythical beasts? There's a few of those. How about a story and player choice driven game that immerses you in another world? They've got you covered. Do you want to buy the same product every year but you don't like Apple? Yep, got that too. Even if you're a purist and you only want to play board and card games, you can still do that on a computer. And this is only scraping the surface. There are hundreds of genres and thousands of games in almost every one. Now I'm going to talk about a particular genre that's pretty close to my heart, and if you've read the title of the video, you already know what I'm going to say. Roguelites! Let's rewind a little. It all started in the far-off year of 1980 with the release of Rogue, an ASCII art turn-based dungeon crawler from Glenn Wichman, Michael Toy, and later, Ken Arnold. It was originally released for Unix and it looked like this, but it was met quite well and was ported to many other more modern systems as time went on. Now the aim of the game is quite simple: get to the lowest level of the dungeon, retrieve the amulet of Yendor, and get back out fighting monsters and acquiring magic items along the way. What made Rogue unique was the way it made you do that. Instead of just designing a dungeon for you to fight through and throwing specific enemies at you, the developers of Rogue decided they wanted to be able to play this game a bunch of different times. So every dungeon level, enemy, and item that the player encounters is procedurally generated. They also used permadeath, so when your character dies on a run, you die in real life. Wait, no, I mean you have to start a whole new run, getting a new experience and new challenges every time you load up the game. Rogue was the first game to combine all these features together, and was graphically quite impressive for its time. Now, with its setting, replay value, and learning curve, it was quite popular with the fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons-esque crowd. So popular that other people wanted to make altered versions of the game, but the creators didn't initially release the source code, so they just made their own games instead, borrowing features from Rogue. Hack came out in 1982, expanding upon Rogue's formula by adding shops to the game where players could go and buy items. Moria came out in 1983. Inspired by Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, it sent players down into the mines to kill a Balrog instead of retrieving an amulet. Both of these games spawned more games and so on and so forth. So a genre had essentially been born, based on 4 features from Rogue. 1. Procedural generation. 2. Turn-based combat. 3. Permadeath. And 4. ASCII art graphics. These 4 features were staples of the genre, aptly dubbed roguelikes for their similarity to the game that started it all. Fast forward to 2002, indie developer Digital Eel releases Strange Adventures in Infinite Space. Players explore the Purple Void, finding different planets and stars, fighting aliens and collecting artifacts. It's procedurally generated. It's turn-based. It's got permadeath. But wait, that's not ASCII graphics. And so the genre changes. It evolves. Games that share elements with Rogue but aren't that 100% purity $200 a gram start emerging. They explored concepts from other video games, combining them with the godly pillars of roguelikes to create beautiful amalgamations of fun and wacky content. Better graphics, different settings, added features, but they started to move further and further away from the 4 commandments. Take Spelunky. Released in 2008, it was inspired by Spelunker, a 1983 platformer. Spelunky not only strays from ASCII graphics, but it's also not turn-based. For those counting at home, that's 2 strikes. Something had to be done. The purists were getting angry. There were protests in the streets, and rightfully so. People were lumping these disgusting pretenders in with their precious roguelikes. In 2008, a collective of world leaders gathered to address the issue. They decided that in order for something to be called a roguelike, it had to adhere to a very strict set of rules. But it wasn't just the original 4. They came up with the Berlin interpretation of roguelikes, a set of 16 factors, some high value, some low. Roguelikes had to be hack and slash, They had to be grid-based as well as turn-based. You had to manage your resources, and by God, they needed to be complex. If you didn't need a 200 IQ and a manual the size of a white pages just to play it, it's not a roguelike. And so a new genre was born, called Roguelites. Or roguelike-likes, but that's a really dumb name and I'm not going to use it. Roguelites are the softer version, the more casual version, for people who aren't smart or dedicated enough to be real gamers. Shockingly, with the ability to evolve and take gameplay concepts from basically wherever they wanted, the genre exploded. There are so many successful and popular games in this genre, and I think they're all the better for having broken the mold of traditional roguelikes. Diablo. It was released by Blizzard in 1996, but reception was lukewarm and they never really followed up on it. Just kidding, it was a huge hit. Fast forward to 2012 and Diablo 3 sold more than 3.5 million copies within 24 hours of its release, jumping to more than 30 million copies by 2015. Despite the fact that the storyline was pretty subpar and the marketplace was, well, exactly as you'd expect, I played it a lot on release. It was fun to play with friends and quite a few issues were ironed out with bug and content patches over time. Actually, yeah, I think I played it on and off for like 4 years. Now, Diablo meets quite a few of the criteria from the Berlin interpretation, but far from all of them. It's not turn-based, it's not permadeath for the most part, and you get to choose from a variety of classes. Sure, it's more of a casual experience, but that's part of the appeal for some people, myself included. I'm here to shoot spells and get loot, and there's nothing quite like watching a legendary item pop out from a barrel. It's like digital crack. Plus, if you are after a more complex and challenging experience, you can play hardcore, where it is permadeath, and there's a lot of number crunching involved in higher level builds too. Darkest Dungeon, another personal favourite of mine. Released in 2015 by Red Hook Studios, let's see which boxes it ticks. It's turn-based, it's complex, it's hack and slash, it's procedurally generated, it's permadeath, sort of. So instead of just having one character, in Darkest Dungeon you control a roster of many. Each time you go into a dungeon you take 4 heroes, stock them up, explore and fight. When a hero dies, you can't get them back, but it's not necessarily game over. You can wipe your 4 best heroes in a difficult encounter and still go back to town and build up your other ones. I really like that, because it retains this feeling of consequence without totally resetting you if you make one mistake. It also plays into one of my favourite parts of roguelites as compared to roguelikes, which is the content between the runs. There's a lot of gameplay to be had between dungeons here, and it gives me a real sense of progression outside of just getting further in a run. Let's look at something even more unique, shall we? Slay the Spire. Developed by Megacrit and fully released in 2019, it brings back some familiar faces. Procedural generation, permadeath, yada yada yada, but there's a twist. It's a card game. The concept of the combination is simple on paper. You fight enemies, you visit shops and open chests, adding cards to your deck and relics to your character along the way. Instead of taking actions like attacking or healing on your turn, you play cards to do those things. But what this really does is add an entire extra layer of customization and complexity. Not only does every character have a different pool of cards they can add to their deck, but there are turn-to-turn considerations such as mana management, card synergies, hand size. I personally think the combination works really well. I love deck building card games and Slay the Spire keeps it really fresh. As you progress, not only do you get to try new combos and learn about the enemies, but you also unlock more cards and relics for future runs. Side note, the daily climbs are some of the most enjoyable video game content I've ever played. If you like roguelites or deck builders, I highly recommend Slay the Spire. Well, that was a fun little combination of genres. Let's dip our toes into another. Risk of Rain 2. Developed by Hopoo Games and fully released in the accursed year of 2020, where gamers were all stuck indoors anyway. Well, what's the shtick this time? It's a third-person shooter. A great introduction to the roguelite genre for people familiar with shooters, or if you're after something that takes a bit of mechanical skill. In addition to the normal variety of enemies and items to help you on your run, there are a range of characters with different abilities and play styles. You get given the first character, but you'll have to work to unlock the rest. Some require simply beating stages or the game itself, and some require more specific challenges. Another cool feature of Risk of Rain 2 is the difficulty timer that rises no matter what you do. So if you take too long, sure you might get some more loot, but the enemies will get harder too. I think that's a really cool mechanic, because not only does it encourage players to get familiar with the game and the different stages, but it also forces you to make some tough decisions along the way. There's not a whole lot to do between runs, but unlocking a new character and playing them for the first time is really satisfying, and the gameplay itself is super fun, so it takes a damn long time to get stale. Okay, I know this has turned into a bit of a game review video, but I swear I only have one more. Hades. I'm gonna level with you guys. Hades is one of my favourite games of all time. Released in 2020 by Supergiant Games, it's an absolutely brilliant roguelite in both concept and execution. At first glance, it might not seem too special, hack and slash dungeon crawling to escape the underworld. Well, firstly, the gameplay is phenomenal, and the different weapons and items you equip yourself with really make for unique runs, but where Hades really shines for me is between the runs. Hades not only has the best setting and storyline I've seen in any roguelite game, but it's really just a compelling story in general. Being in the House of Hades isn't just you preparing for your next escape attempt. You can talk to the other gods, give them gifts to earn their favour, pet the dog. Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? And there's a lot of work you can do with your character, Zagreus, between runs as well. Also, the art style is gorgeous. Look at it. Okay, I could go on and on about Hades for hours, but this isn't a game review video. So now that we've gone through some games in the genre, why are they so special and different? What makes them so popular? On paper, the idea of permadeath and essentially doing the same thing over and over again not only sounds infuriating, but genuinely boring. So why do we do it? Well, the way I see it, there are three main reasons. Number one, accessibility. Unlike roguelikes, which can be overwhelming in their complexity and difficulty, roguelites are a bit more accessible and familiar in their mechanics. Since they borrow from other genres and games, it's easy for gamers to jump into certain titles, even if they've never really experienced the roguelite genre in the first place. Take Slay the Spire. If you're a Hearthstone veteran or you've dabbled in everyone's favourite online card game, Artifact, you'll be able to dive straight into Slay the Spire no problem. Obviously, this effect then has the ability to sort of snowball. Once you try one, you might be more willing to try out other roguelites in the genre, and so on and so forth. Number 2. Variety. Wait, Josh, didn't you just say that these games involve doing the same thing over and over again? Well, yes, it's called foreshadowing, because if the developers are clever, you really won't feel the repetition all that much. Whether it's different characters, skills, items, and enemies, all of these roguelites find a way to keep each run feeling fresh and unique. So much is randomized due to procedural generation, and part of the fun of these games is doing a bunch of runs just to find all the different monsters and items available to you as a player. It also allows you to be a bit creative with your build or your playstyle. You might be seeing a lot of a particular enemy and build specifically to combat them, or pick up items that synergize with the ones that you already have. Number 3. A sense of progression. The line that I think sums it up is easy to learn, hard to master. You might not get too far in your first few runs, but after a while you'll get closer and closer by adjusting your strategy and learning more about the game. The genre as a whole really rewards learning the mechanics and refining your playstyle, so it's all the more satisfying when you do beat that final boss, knowing how many times you tried and practiced to do so. Almost all of these entries also offer experiences beyond just completing the game, so you can continue to test your skill and creativity pretty much indefinitely. Take Hades for example. It takes quite a few successful runs to the overworld just to deliver the full story, so even once you've smacked your dad to the curb for the first time, the game's not over. It goes without saying that getting better at any skill is pretty rewarding anyway, so improving at these games is satisfying by its own merit. I've no doubt that dozens of major titles will appear over the next few years and shake up the roguelite genre all over again, which can only ever be a good thing. And since the focus isn't on AAA level graphics or voice acting, smaller studios can develop really good roguelites too. The only limit is your imagination. God, that was really lame, I'm sorry. So if I haven't convinced you by now that roguelites are the best video games to ever grace a computer screen, then go ahead and just drag that little progress bubble back to the start of the video and pay attention this time, you goddamn casual. In all seriousness though, thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and have a good one.